A friend of mine let me use his family's cabin for a weekend. It was out in the Oregon woods, a few hours from any major town. He said no one had used it in months, and that I'd have the whole place to myself. I was looking forward to some quiet time, no phone, no work emails, just peace. The cabin was old but solid, tucked into the trees near a narrow dirt road. It was one of those places where everything creaked, and the woods smelled like rain and time. There were no neighbors, no cell signal either. That was part of the charm. When I pulled up late Friday afternoon, the first thing I noticed was that the front door was already slightly open. Not wide, just enough to make me stop for a second. I didn't think too much of it. I figured maybe my friend or someone in his family had been there recently and forgot to pull it shut properly. It wasn't like the place was in a high-crime area. Still, I felt uneasy. I stepped inside and called out, but it was quiet, just the faint ticking of an old clock somewhere in the living room. Inside, it looked untouched. Dust sat in thin layers on the shelves, and there were cobwebs in the corners of the ceiling. The living room had an old couch with a worn quilt draped over the back, a fireplace, and a bookshelf filled with yellowed paperbacks. The kitchen had a few rusted pans hanging on the wall, a small propane stove, and a narrow table with 2 chairs. I checked every room, just 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom. Everything looked like it hadn't been used in months, just like my friend had said. But then, in the bigger bedroom, I noticed something that didn't match. In the corner near the window was a pile of clothes. Not folded, not packed away. Just a crumpled pile like someone had dropped them there. Jeans, a hoodie, socks, underwear. They weren't covered in dust. In fact, they looked and smelled recent. The socks were damp, like someone had taken them off after sweating in them. There was also a water bottle half full sitting beside the bed. It wasn't mine. I hadn't brought any of that. That's when I started feeling that tight pressure in my chest. I opened the closet, empty. I checked under the bed. Nothing but dust bunnies and an old shoe. I went back out into the hallway and opened the door to the crawl space under the cabin, which was near the kitchen. The air that came up smelled damp and earthy, like rotting leaves. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and pointed it down the stairs. The crawl space was low, you couldn't stand upright in it, and stretched under the whole cabin. In one corner, on a slab of plywood, was a rolled-up sleeping bag. Next to it, a crumpled plastic wrapper from a granola bar, the kind you get at gas stations. There were also 3 empty water bottles and a pack of cigarettes. No signs of anyone there now, but someone had definitely been living there. Maybe still was. I backed out slowly and closed the door. Then I locked it. I went back and checked the front door again. I locked that too. Same with all the windows. I double-checked every single one. I tried to tell myself maybe it was just some hiker or someone who stumbled on the place and took shelter. It was possible, but that didn't help much when night fell. It got cold after dark. I lit a fire in the fireplace and sat on the couch, reading one of the old books from the shelf, but I couldn't focus. Every creak in the wood, every gust of wind outside made me stop and listen. The forest outside was dead silent. Not even crickets, just the occasional rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. At around 10 p.m., I shut off the lights and lay in the smaller bedroom. I didn't want to sleep in the room with the clothes. I kept my flashlight and a kitchen knife next to the bed, just in case. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I remember waking up to the sound of wood creaking. At first, I thought it was just the cabin settling, but it was rhythmic, slow, like footsteps on the front porch, one at a time, the kind of slow steps someone takes when they're trying not to be heard. I held my breath and sat completely still in the dark. The footsteps stopped for a moment. Then the doorknob started to rattle. Not violently, just a slow, soft turn, like someone was trying to open it gently. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. My heart was beating so hard I was afraid whoever was out there would hear it. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then I heard another soft creak, like someone shifting their weight on the porch. And then, nothing. I stayed frozen like that for what felt like an hour. Every time I thought about getting up to look, I imagined the door opening and someone walking in. Eventually, the exhaustion got to me. I must have dozed off, because I woke up again to gray light coming through the window. It was just past 6 a.m. The The first thing I did was grab the flashlight and go out front. The air was crisp, and the ground was damp from dew. I looked down at the dirt near the porch, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. They were clear, pressed deep into the earth. Pair of them. One set led up the steps. Then they stopped at the door. No prints leading away. I looked around the cabin, nothing else disturbed. No sign of forced entry. But those prints weren't mine. They were wider and longer. Whoever they belonged to had stood there, just outside the door, listening, watching. I packed up immediately. I didn't even eat breakfast. I left the firewood stacked, the beds unmade, everything as it was. I locked the door behind me, though I wasn't sure what the point was anymore. As I drove back down the dirt road, every time I passed a clearing or a shadow between trees, I felt like someone was standing there, just out of sight, watching the car go by. I called my friend as soon as I hit cell service, told him everything. He swore no one in his family had been up there, said he'd call his uncle to go check it out. I never heard anything else after that. Never found out who had been staying under the cabin. Never found out who walked up to the door in the middle of the night. I haven't been back. I won't go back. Sometimes I still think about those footprints, about how they stopped right at the door. No prints going back down, like whoever it was hadn't left. Like they were still there when I woke up, just waiting. I rented a cheap hunting cabin in West Virginia for a week to clear my head. I'd been dealing with some personal stuff, bad breakup, stress at work, a general sense of burnout. I needed to be somewhere quiet, far away from people, phones, traffic, anything, just trees and silence. I found the listing on a small site that didn't even look fully functional. One blurry photo showed a crooked-looking cabin tucked in a thicket of woods. The price was low enough that I figured it had to be rough, but I didn't care. The owner met me at the start of the gravel road that led into the woods. Middle-aged guy, heavy-set, thick mustache. He didn't say much, just gave me the keys, pointed me down the road, and said, "Just don't open the basement. It's locked anyway." Then he got in his truck and drove off. I assumed he was just being cautious or maybe had tools stored down there. I didn't plan to snoop, so I didn't ask. The drive-in was about a mile of rutted dirt road. Trees crowded in on both sides, thick with overgrowth, and I had to stop twice to move fallen branches. The cabin was smaller than I expected. One room with a narrow bed, a cracked leather couch, a table with 2 chairs, and a small kitchen with a propane stove. No TV, no cell signal. A musty smell hung in the air, like wet wood and mildew. Every surface felt slightly damp. The wood-paneled walls had warped with age, and the floor creaked with every step. Still, it was quiet. That's what I'd come for. The first few days were uneventful. I'd wake up early, make coffee, sit on the porch for hours. I brought a stack of old paperbacks and spent most of the time reading or walking the trails behind the cabin. It felt like I was the only person for miles. No cars, no voices, not even planes overhead. Just wind and the occasional rustle of animals moving through the woods. I slept like a rock those first few nights, but on the 4th night, something woke me up around 2 a.m. I couldn't tell what it was at first, just that weird sensation of being pulled out of deep sleep. The cabin was dark and completely quiet. I listened for a few seconds, thinking maybe it was a branch hitting the roof or an animal outside. Then I heard it again, a slow, dragging sound. Not fast or violent, but steady, like something heavy being pulled across concrete. It was coming from below me. I sat up in bed and looked toward the kitchen, where the basement door was. It was shut, same as always. I got up and walked over barefoot, the floor groaning under me. I knelt and pressed my ear to the door. The sound had stopped. I stayed there a minute longer, listening hard, but it didn't come back. I figured it might be rats or raccoons. Maybe they got in through some broken vent or gap under the house. It's an old place, after all. The next day, I barely thought about it. I hiked further out than usual, found a stream, ate lunch on a rock, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. But when I went to sleep that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I left the cabin lights on and shut the bedroom door. Around the same time, 2 a.m. or so, I woke up again. This time it was slower, more deliberate, the same dragging sound, but broken up, like pauses between movements. It almost sounded like someone dragging a sack, stopping to catch their breath, and then continuing. I got out of bed and walked to the basement door again. I didn't knock, I just pressed my ear to it. I heard breathing, not loud, not ragged, just slow and steady right on the other side. I stayed frozen there, hand on the doorknob. My heart was thudding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't armed, and my phone was useless out here. I stood there for maybe a minute before I backed away and locked myself in the bedroom for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I wrote an email to the owner, told him I was hearing noises from the basement and asked if anyone else had keys or if animals could get down there. Then I sent a text in case he didn't check email. No reply. I waited all morning. Still nothing. By noon, I'd made up my mind. I'd leave the next morning and just eat the cost of the rest of the stay. I didn't want to be there another night, but I also didn't want to be packing up and hiking out through dense woods while it was getting dark. That afternoon, I kept to the cabin. Didn't hike, just read and drank coffee and checked my phone for signal every 15 minutes. It never came back. I went to bed early with my boots next to the bed and a flashlight in my hand. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, I knew something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. The air felt different, colder somehow. Still, the kind of still that feels full. I sat up and looked at the kitchen. The basement door was open, not cracked or slightly ajar. Wide open, like someone had thrown it open and walked down. The lights were off, and all I could see beyond the threshold was black. No steps, no floor, just empty dark. I didn't move. I just sat there staring, trying to understand what I was looking at. I didn't hear anything. No breathing, no dragging. But something about that open door chilled me worse than anything I'd ever felt. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff in the fog, knowing there's a drop but not how far down it goes. I stood up slowly, never taking my eyes off the doorway. I backed toward the bed, grabbed my bag, and started stuffing everything into it. I didn't care about folding or organizing. I just crammed it all in, zipped it shut, and slung it over my shoulder. I kept the flashlight in my hand. As I moved toward the door, I had to pass within a few feet of the basement. I gave it the widest berth I could, walking along the far wall. Every instinct in my body told me not to look down into it, not to check, not to see what was there. So I didn't. I stepped outside and shut the front door behind me, not bothering to lock it. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky had lightened just enough to see the path. I didn't stop. I didn't even breathe right until I was halfway to my car. I kept imagining footsteps behind me, soft ones, timed with mine, but I never looked back. When I reached the gravel pullout where I'd left the car, it was right where I parked it. I got in, turned the key, and backed out so fast the wheels kicked up a cloud of dust. I didn't stop driving until I hit the highway an hour later. Even then, I kept checking the rear view. I never got a response from the owner. The site I booked through went offline a few days later. It just stopped loading. I searched for the property again, thinking maybe I could report it, but it was gone. No listing, no cabin rental, nothing. I don't know what was in that basement. I don't want to know. I just know that someone or something was down there. Not a ghost, not a monster. Something real, something that breathed, something that waited 4 days before opening the door. And that's enough for me. I won't ever go back. I rented a small off-grid cabin in northern Minnesota in late September, just as the leaves were turning. I'd been feeling overwhelmed for a while, burnt out from work, from people, from everything. I wanted silence, isolation, no cell reception, no emails, no news. The place I found was 10 miles down an old logging road, then a hike on foot through dense forest, along a narrow, rocky trail lined with birch and pine. The cabin was smaller than I expected. Just one room, a cot in the corner, a wood stove, a table with a single chair, and shelves with some rusted cookware and empty mason jars. No electricity, no plumbing. Just an outhouse out back and a hand pump well maybe 50 yards away. It was quiet. Too quiet, almost. I didn't hear any birds when I got there. Just the wind moving through the trees and the crunch of leaves under my boots. That first night, I cooked some beans on the old propane burner, read a bit by lantern light, and fell asleep early, wrapped in my sleeping bag. The next morning, I spent most of the day gathering firewood and trying to keep busy. I had a weird restless feeling, like I needed to keep moving, keep doing things. Maybe it was just being that far away from everything. No phone, no noise, nothing but my own thoughts bouncing around in my head. In the late afternoon, I decided to sweep the floor. The wooden planks were old and uneven, dusty with age, with bits of bark and leaves tracked in from my boots. I moved the cot, the table, got in all the corners. That's when I noticed a small section near the stove that gave a bit when I stepped on it. It was subtle, but enough that I got curious. I knelt down and pried at the edge with my pocket knife. The board lifted with a creak, revealing a shallow gap between the floor and the earth below. Inside was a small leather-bound journal. It was worn, the edges frayed, pages yellowed slightly with time. I sat down on the cot and opened it. The first page had a name I didn't recognize and a date 2 years ago, October. The entries started simple. Notes about the weather, the solitude, the beauty of the woods. He had come here for the same reasons I did. To get away, to clear his head, to be alone. But after a few pages, the tone started to shift. The handwriting got more hurried, less neat. I heard something last night, thought it was an animal, but it walked like a man. I woke up this morning and found footprints in the frost outside the door. Bare feet, too big to be mine. I keep my hat hung on the hook by the door. This morning it was gone. Then I saw someone standing at the edge of the trees wearing it. Just standing, watching. I didn't sleep last night. They came closer. They tapped on the walls. I barricaded the door. I think they're still out there. The last entry was the worst. Just 5 words, scrawled in shaky handwriting. They're inside. I can't move. There were no more pages after that. I stared at the journal for a long time. My hands were cold. I could hear my own heartbeat. It was the middle of the afternoon, but the light already looked like it was fading outside. The sun dipped early this far north, especially with the heavy tree cover. I slipped the journal back into the hole, put the board over it, and stood up slowly. Every instinct in me told me to leave it alone, to pretend I hadn't seen it. I tried to stay calm, told myself it was probably some kind of story, maybe a prank, someone trying to scare the next visitor. But it didn't feel like that. There was something too raw about it, too honest. The handwriting changed, the tone, the way the sentences broke down near the end. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me jump. The pop of the stove cooling down, a branch brushing against the roof, leaves rustling outside. Around midnight, I thought I heard something on the porch, a dull creak like weight shifting on old wood. I held my breath and listened for minutes straight, my eyes fixed on the door. I stayed like that for hours, knife in hand, barely blinking. Every time the wind blew, it felt like something might move against the wall. I could feel the pressure in my chest building, like something was sitting on it. Around 3 or 4 a.m., I finally let my body slump a little, but I didn't sleep. I didn't even lay down, just sat against the wall, knife still in my grip, watching the windows. As soon as the sky began to lighten, I packed my gear. I didn't eat, didn't even drink water. I just stuffed my sleeping bag, rolled it, and strapped it to my pack. I left the cabin exactly as I'd found it. Didn't touch the journal again. Didn't sweep. Didn't leave a note. I didn't want to think about who might be watching, or what they might do if they saw me looking too closely. I stepped off the porch and started down the trail, moving fast. Too fast for the rough terrain, really. The woods were thick, the ground soft from a recent rain, and the roots slick. I slipped twice but caught myself both times. Every few steps I looked behind me, expecting to see someone coming through the trees. There was never anyone there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was close. The woods felt different on the way out. I know that sounds vague, but it's the only way I can describe it. like they were watching me, like I didn't belong anymore. I had the knife out the entire time. I didn't even put it away when I passed a small doe drinking from a puddle off the path. Normally, I would have stopped and watched, but I just walked past her. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stood there, like she didn't care that I was there at all. About 5 miles in, I started to hear things. Snaps like twigs breaking underfoot. Once, I thought I heard breathing, not my own, not close, but steady, slow, and to my right, off the trail. I didn't stop to check. I just kept walking. My legs burned, but I didn't slow down. I made it to my car by noon. It looked untouched, just as I'd left it. I threw my pack in the trunk, climbed into the driver's seat, locked all the doors, and sat there for a long time. My hands were shaking so bad I had trouble getting the keys into the ignition. I drove without stopping for hours all the way down to Duluth, where I checked into a cheap motel just off the highway. Only then did I realize how thirsty I was, how hungry. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and finally breathed. I've told myself 100 times that the journal was fake, that the sounds I heard were animals, that my brain was just running wild from being alone in the woods too long. But the truth is, something about that place wasn't right. I've been in the woods all my life. I've camped, hiked, stayed in fire towers and ranger cabins. But I've never felt what I felt out there. That deep, crawling sense that I wasn't alone. That something was just barely out of sight. I never reported the journal. Never told the owner. I just deleted the rental confirmation from my email and blocked the number. I haven't gone back into the woods since. Not alone. I still see that last line in my head sometimes. Not just the words, but the way they looked. Uneven, like the pen was slipping, like the hand holding it was shaking. They're inside. I can't move. Whoever wrote that never signed their name again. No explanation. No ending. I gave myself one, though. I left. I walked out and I didn't look back. And that's the only reason I'm here now. I booked the cabin through a rental site I'd used a few times before. This one was listed under secluded getaways, the kind of place off the grid where people go to unplug. I've been feeling burned out from work and just wanted quiet. No emails, no calls, no noise. The listing said it was in rural Arkansas, 3 hours from the nearest town. No neighbors for miles. A single-room cabin with rustic charm and total privacy. The pictures showed a basic wooden structure, surrounded by pine trees. No frills, just the bare necessities. Perfect for what I needed. The directions they sent weren't detailed. More like a set of loose steps. Turn here, follow that dirt road, look for a faded red mailbox. I figured I'd manage with GPS, but after a certain point, I lost signal. The paved road turned to gravel and the gravel to dirt, and eventually it was just 2 tire tracks through the woods. I kept going. It had taken me too long to find this place, and I wasn't about to turn around now. After almost 3 hours of weaving through back roads and second-guessing every turn, I found it. The cabin looked exactly like the pictures, maybe a little older, but not in a bad way. Just weathered. A single-room shack, raised slightly off the ground, with a tiny front step and a rusted tin roof. It was early afternoon, but the trees were so dense that the whole area looked dim, like late evening. I parked the car, grabbed my bag, and walked up. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The temperature dropped the moment I crossed the threshold. It was colder than outside, and not in a way that made sense. There was a mattress in the corner, just a twin with an old sagging frame. Next to it, a wooden chair. No decorations, no rugs, no welcome note. Just bare floorboards and bare walls. There was no power, no outlets, not even a switch for lights. I hadn't expected much, but it still felt stripped down, like someone had taken a storage shed and thrown a bed into it. No toilet, just a rusty bucket on the side and a water jug. The air inside smelled dry and still, like no one had opened the place in months. I walked around a bit, checked the corners, opened the one cabinet by the door. Empty. No plates, no supplies, not even a single cup or fork. I looked for a guest book or contact info, anything that would tie this place to the listing. Nothing. I pulled out my phone, but I had no signal, not even a bar. I held it up, walked around outside. Still nothing. I thought about leaving, driving all the way back out before it got dark. But I was already here and I was tired. The quiet was what I came for, after all. I tried to brush off the weirdness, convincing myself that I was just uncomfortable being alone in such an isolated place. That night, I barely slept. The mattress was hard and dipped in the middle. I kept waking up every hour, not because of sounds, there weren't any, but because of how still it was. No wind, no crickets, just silence. That thick, unnatural kind that presses on your ears. Even in the woods, that felt wrong. The cold never left either. I had brought a sleeping bag, but even zipped up inside, I could feel the chill coming off the walls and floor, like the whole cabin had been underground for months and someone had just dragged it into daylight. I stayed one night. That was enough. In the morning, I packed up quickly. Didn't even eat the granola bars I brought. I just wanted to leave. I drove out the way I came, retracing the dirt path back to the gravel, back to asphalt. When I finally got signal a few towns over, I tried to pull up the listing to leave a review, just to warn others that it was too empty, too strange, too bare. But the listing wasn't there. Not in my history, not in my account. I checked my confirmation email, but it was gone too, like I'd never gotten one. I opened my bank app to check the payment. No charge, nothing pending, nothing processed. It was like I'd imagined the whole thing. I emailed the rental site. No response. Then I called. After a while on hold, they told me they had no listing like that. Not in Arkansas, not under that name, not ever. I asked them to look up my payment, my booking ID. They said my account didn't show any recent bookings. I was too tired to argue. I figured maybe it was a scam listing that had been pulled. It bothered me, but I let it go. Mostly. 3 days later, it still gnawed at me. I couldn't stop thinking about that place. How isolated it was. How it had no trace of being lived in. No tools, no books, not even dust in the corners. It didn't feel like a place for people. More like something meant to be looked at, not used. I wanted answers, so I drove back. I saved my route as best I could from memory and Google Maps cache data. I knew the turns, the mailbox, the last fork in the road. Took longer than before. The roads felt unfamiliar and some parts looked different. Trees I didn't remember, paths that had collapsed or faded. Eventually I reached the spot. I knew I was close. I recognized a fallen log, a patch of crushed grass where I had parked. But the cabin wasn't there. Not just gone, like not even disturbed. No footprints, no tire tracks, no scrap of wood or patch of dirt to show it had ever stood there. Just trees, tall, old, untouched. No road leading in, no clearing. I got out and walked around for almost an hour, pushed through branches, checked behind thickets, climbed a small ridge to get a better view. Nothing. The area was dense, wild. No sign of construction, not even a foundation. I started to wonder if I'd driven to the wrong spot, but I recognized too much. I stood in the exact place I remembered parking. I could see the curve of the path, the slope of the land. I was in the right place. The cabin just wasn't. On the drive back, my mind ran in circles. I told myself it had been torn down. Maybe it was a temporary structure. Maybe someone had hauled it out, scrubbed the site. But who does that in 3 days? And why? More than anything, what stuck with me was the way it had felt inside. That cold, unnatural stillness. The way the air didn't move. The way nothing in that cabin suggested people had ever lived there. Not even for a night. It wasn't like a house someone abandoned. It was like something someone had put together just long enough for me to find, and then taken back. I stopped telling people about it. They either didn't believe me or said I must have gotten lost. Maybe they're right, but every now and then, I check that rental site. I scroll through the listings, especially the vague ones. Sometimes I think I see it, same angle, same roof, same trees. But the name's different. The location's different. I click and it's gone. Just another vanishing shack in the middle of nowhere. I booked the cabin because I needed to get away. Life had been moving too fast. Too many emails, too much traffic, too many people talking at me all the time. I wanted quiet. I wanted space. I found this cabin online, buried deep in the forests of rural Montana. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, no cell service, just me and the trees. It was exactly what I needed. I arrived late Friday afternoon. The last 30 miles were on a dirt road that twisted through thick pine woods. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was dropping behind the hills. The place was simple but well built. One bedroom, a small kitchen, and a big open living space. It had a fireplace and these massive windows that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, giving a perfect view of the forest outside. The glass was clean and clear, like looking at a painting. The silence hit me hard in a good way. No hum of traffic, no distant voices, just wind in the trees and the occasional rustle of branches. That first night was uneventful. I lit a fire, made dinner, and read a paperback until I fell asleep. I didn't even set an alarm. I let the morning light wake me naturally, and for the first time in months, I felt rested. I spent the day walking around the area, not too far, just exploring the edge of the woods. There were no other houses, no footpaths, no signs of life other than deer tracks and the occasional bird flitting through the canopy. It was exactly what I had hoped for: stillness, emptiness. It was on the second night that things shifted. After dinner, I stood by the window and watched the trees sway in the wind. It had gotten colder, and the moon was nearly full, throwing long silver shadows across the ground. I stared out there for a long time without really thinking, letting my mind slow down. Around 10, I got ready for bed. I brushed my teeth in the small bathroom, which also had a window facing the woods. It was one of those narrow vertical ones, tall and thin. I wasn't paying attention to anything outside. I was staring into the mirror, half asleep already, when something flickered in the corner of my eye, just a flash of movement. I stopped brushing and leaned toward the window. At first I didn't see anything, but I turned off the bathroom light to kill the glare on the glass. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing about 30 feet from the cabin, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. He wasn't moving. He wasn't walking. He was just standing, facing the window, facing me. I couldn't make out his face or what he was wearing, just the dark outline of his body. Shoulders, arms, head, still as a post. No swaying, no shifting, not even a tilt of the head. Just fixed, pointed directly at me. For a few seconds, I didn't move. My heart picked up fast, beating in my chest like a drum. I backed slowly out of the bathroom, careful not to let my feet thump on the floor. I turned off all the lights in the cabin and crept into the living room, crouching behind the couch so I could still see the forest through the big windows without being seen easily in return. He was still there. Same spot, same posture, not moving an inch. I stared at him for what felt like hours, barely breathing. My knees started to ache from staying low, but I didn't dare stand. I kept watching, waiting for him to take a step forward or turn or do anything. But he didn't. He just stood there. Time moved painfully slow. I checked my watch once. It was just after midnight. Then I checked again what felt like an hour later. It was 12:17. The worst part was not knowing what he wanted. If he had been walking around or had a weapon or even shouted something, I might have known what I was dealing with. But the silence, the stillness, that was worse. It was like he was waiting for something, or watching me for a reason I couldn't understand. I don't know when I finally dozed off, but I woke to the gray light of dawn coming through the windows. I sat up quickly, my body stiff, my mouth dry. I blinked at the forest, my eyes struggling to adjust. He was gone. The spot where he had stood was just trees and brush. No movement, no shadow, no shape, just empty forest. I waited for the sun to come up higher before I stepped outside. I didn't want to, but I had to see if he'd left anything. Footprints, something. I walked carefully toward the area, scanning the ground. The dirt was soft in places, covered with pine needles in others. But there were no tracks, no signs anyone had stood there. I even checked a wider area, thinking maybe I'd misjudged the distance in the dark. But it was the same, nothing disturbed. No broken branches, no flattened grass, just woods, silent and still like always. I felt sick, not just scared, but deeply unsettled, like something had been taken from me while I slept and I couldn't name what. I packed up quickly, tossed everything in the back of my car, and didn't bother cleaning up. I drove out faster than I should have, fishtailing a few times on the loose dirt road, just trying to get back to the highway. I told myself I'd imagine it differently once I was home, that maybe I was half asleep or had seen a tree the wrong way in the moonlight. But the feeling didn't fade, and it hasn't. It's been 3 weeks now. I'm back at home, safe, surrounded by neighbors, traffic, streetlights. But it doesn't matter. Some nights, I wake up in the dark, heart racing. I look toward the window even before I realize I'm awake. Sometimes I get out of bed and check it, just in case. Last night, I stared through the glass for almost an hour. There was nothing out there, but the feeling wouldn't leave me, that someone was watching. Not in an obvious way, not pressing against the glass or tapping at the screen. Just there, just beyond the light, like he had followed me, or worse, that he'd never had to follow me. That maybe he wasn't some random guy in the woods. That maybe he'd always known where I was going. That he waited for me to come. I don't know what I saw. I don't know what he wanted. But I know what I felt. And that feeling hasn't gone away. I keep the blinds closed now. I lock every door and window. I check them twice. But sometimes, I'll look up and catch my reflection in the glass at night. And for a split second, I think I see someone behind me. Still, silent, watching. I rented the cabin to get away and finish writing a manuscript that had been sitting half done on my laptop for months. It was a small place, tucked in the woods of Idaho, about 45 minutes from the nearest town. I found it through a private rental site, nothing fancy, just a single-story log cabin with a front porch, a small wood stove, and a shed out back stocked with firewood. The owner said he used to come out during hunting season but hadn't visited in over a year. It seemed perfect. Just me, the trees, and silence. The first couple days were exactly what I needed. I wrote in long stretches without interruption, made simple meals, walked the woods behind the property, and slept early. The cabin was old but solid. No electricity, just propane lanterns and a battery-powered radio. The only sound at night was the wind pushing through the trees and sometimes a branch knocking against the roof. I didn't have cell service, which I actually liked. No distractions. On the third morning, I went out to the shed to grab more firewood. It was a low, narrow structure with a sliding door that didn't lock. Inside were stacked logs, an old wheelbarrow, and some tools hanging on nails, an axe, a rusted handsaw, and a few garden tools. I hadn't paid much attention to the tools before, but that day I noticed the axe was missing. So was the saw. I stood there for a minute just staring at the empty hooks where they had been. It didn't make sense. I hadn't touched them. I was sure they were there the day before. I checked the ground near the shed, thinking maybe they fell. Nothing. No sign of them. I convinced myself I must have just remembered it wrong. Maybe I saw the tools in a different shed, or maybe the hooks were always empty. I grabbed a few logs and went back inside, trying not to dwell on it. Still, the thought nagged at me. The next morning, I went to get more firewood and something else was off. There was a strange shape behind the stacked logs along the back wall of the shed. At first, I thought it was just more wood, but when I got closer, I saw it was a makeshift cot. Someone had taken a couple thin blankets and laid them across a wooden pallet. A rolled-up hoodie was shoved under one end like a pillow. There was an empty plastic bottle beside it, and a dirty boot print on the floor next to it. I just stood there for a long time, staring at it. I remember the feeling. It wasn't fear exactly, but a tightening in my chest. A sense that something was wrong, and that I was already too close to it. I backed out slowly, shut the shed door without touching anything, and walked straight back to the cabin. Inside, I checked every window and every door. I hadn't been locking the cabin at night, but I did that day. I locked the front door, latched the back door, and closed all the curtains. The place suddenly didn't feel quiet or peaceful anymore. It felt exposed. That afternoon, I sat by the window, trying to write, but my mind kept wandering back to the cot. Whoever set that up had been sleeping there recently. The blankets weren't covered in dust. and the bottle hadn't been frozen, which it would have been if it had been sitting out long. I started to wonder how many nights someone had been out there while I was sleeping just a few dozen feet away. Later that day, as I was tossing wood into the stove, I noticed something small near the door, wedged between the floorboards and the mat. It was a sock, a man's sock, still damp, not wet like it had just come out of a puddle, but slightly moist like someone had been wearing it recently. It was inside the cabin. I stared at it for a long time. The air felt thinner suddenly. My mind raced through possibilities. Had it gotten tracked in on my boot? Was it left by a previous renter? But the cabin wasn't the kind of place that saw a lot of guests. The owner told me he only rented it out a couple times a year, and I knew I hadn't brought it in. That night, I didn't sleep much. I pushed the small dresser in front of the door and kept the fire low so the light wouldn't show through the curtains. I stayed fully dressed, lying in bed with my boots on, listening. Every little sound outside made my heart thump. The creak of the walls, the groan of the trees, even the faint crackle of cooling wood in the stove. It all sounded sharper. Around 3 a.m., I heard something that didn't blend into the rest. It was soft at first, a faint rattle like someone gently testing the front doorknob. I froze. I didn't move a muscle. The sound stopped. Then came a different noise, slow, deliberate tapping on the window to my left. Not branches, not an animal, fingernails or something hard. Tap, tap, pause, then another. I held my breath. I didn't dare get up or even turn my head toward the window. I just stared at the ceiling, my whole body rigid. I remember thinking if I didn't move, maybe they'd go away. Maybe they'd think no one was inside. The tapping lasted less than a minute, but it felt like hours. Then silence. I didn't sleep. I sat there in bed until daylight started to break through the edge of the curtains. When I finally moved, my limbs were stiff. I felt like I hadn't blinked in hours. As soon as there was enough light, I shoved everything back into my bag. Laptop, clothes, food, toiletries. I didn't even brush my teeth. I didn't make coffee. I didn't eat. I just threw my stuff in the car, took one last look at the cabin, and left. On the porch, there were muddy footprints, several, leading up to the door and then doubling back. Different sizes, some wider, some narrower. I crouched down and looked closely. Some were dry, others still wet, like more than one person had been there at different times. And on the window where I heard the tapping, there were smudged fingerprints, 5 of them, pressed against the glass. I drove nonstop back to town, heart pounding the entire way. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced someone was in the back seat or following me through the trees. I didn't feel safe until I hit pavement again and saw other cars. A week later, I was still shaken. I hadn't told anyone. I kept trying to write it off as a squatter or a drifter, something rational. But then I came across a news article while scrolling through local Idaho headlines online. Just a short piece, but enough to tie everything together. It said a man had escaped from a halfway house 2 months earlier. He was last seen hiking north through a wooded area about 15 miles from the cabin. He'd been arrested for breaking and entering and had a history of living off-grid. Police believed he was still in the area, possibly squatting in sheds or abandoned buildings. They hadn't found him. That was the last piece. It explained the missing tools, the cot, the sock, the noise at night. It didn't make it better, but it made it real. Someone had been living behind the shed, watching me, maybe more than one. Maybe they'd been waiting for me to fall asleep each night. Maybe they'd been inside before I arrived. I never went back. I never contacted the owner. I deleted the listing, blocked the number, and stored everything I wrote on a flash drive I haven't touched since. I thought I wanted peace and quiet to write, but there's a line between quiet and being alone. That cabin crossed it. I went with 4 friends, Josh, Mark, Olivia, and Darren, to a cabin in the Colorado mountains in early October. Josh's cousin owned the place and said we could use it for the weekend. It was way out there. We had to drive 2 hours past the last gas station, then hike a mile off a gravel road to reach it. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just thick forest, cold air, and silence all around. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, made of old pine logs with a stone chimney. No electricity, just a wood stove for heat, some lanterns, and a hand pump for water. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean enough. We brought in everything: canned food, sleeping bags, coolers, firewood, even playing cards and a Bluetooth speaker with downloaded music. It was supposed to be a simple weekend. Drink, relax, disconnect. The first day was normal. We got there around noon, settled in, hiked a little, then cooked dinner over the fire pit outside. As the sun dropped behind the trees, the temperature fell fast. We moved inside, lit the stove, played cards by lantern light, and drank beer. By midnight, we were tired and buzzed, so we all went to our sleeping bags. The silence out there was heavy. No cars, no wind, just the occasional crack of branches shifting under their own weight. The next day was colder. There was frost on the steps in the morning. We made breakfast, then split up for a while. Mark and Olivia went to try fishing in a nearby creek. Darren and I collected more firewood. Josh stayed behind to read. The day passed slowly. By sunset, everyone was back. We made chili and talked about life, normal stuff. Felt good, like the world was far away. That night, after dinner, we sat at the old wooden table, still playing cards. It was probably close to 10. The lanterns were burning low, and the stove was going strong, filling the place with dry heat and the smell of smoke. We were halfway through a game when we heard it. A scream came from outside, farther into the woods. Sharp, female, not like someone startled, but someone in pain. Long and loud. We all froze. No one said anything, just stared at each other. Then it came again. Not closer, but no less clear. A woman screaming, maybe 2 or 3 seconds at a time. Then silence. It didn't stop there. Every few minutes, like clockwork, it came again. That same scream, just slightly different each time. Sometimes longer, sometimes strained, like someone was hurt or trying to sound like they were. None of us moved. We weren't sure what to do. We didn't have weapons, just a hatchet and a few pocket knives. No cell service, no way to call for help, and no clue what direction it was coming from. The sound echoed between the trees. Could have been 100 yards away or a mile. The darkness outside the windows was total. No moon, no light, just trees. Mark went to the window once, peeked through a crack in the curtain, then backed away without saying a word. Olivia looked pale. I felt like my body was buzzing. My fingers, my chest. Not fear exactly, but a kind of electricity, like something in me was waiting to react. We talked quietly, going back and forth. Some wanted to go outside, try to help. Others said no, we didn't know what was out there. Could be real, or a trap, or something worse, like someone trying to lure us out. A scream every few minutes for over an hour isn't normal. It's not what people do when they're actually hurt. We couldn't shake the feeling that something about it felt wrong. Eventually, we decided to stay put. We locked the door with the heavy deadbolt and put the cooler in front of it. We turned down the lanterns and sat in silence. The screaming kept going for a while, coming and going like waves, then just stopped. Not faded, not slowly, just stopped. We didn't sleep much. Every sound outside made me twitch. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, but I didn't look. I just lay still and waited. I kept thinking that if someone or something was out there, looking in through those windows, we'd never know unless it wanted us to. When morning came, it was cold and gray. None of us said much. We got dressed and went outside, split up and walked into the woods a little each direction, 50 to 100 yards just to look for anything. Footprints, trash, broken branches, any sign someone had been there. Nothing, just pine needles, dry leaves, and silence. We walked down toward the road, thinking maybe someone had gotten lost and made it out that way. Still nothing. No tire marks, no gear, no blood, no disturbed ground. It was like nothing happened at all. Back at the cabin, we packed up fast. We hadn't planned to leave until the next day, but no one argued. We didn't even eat, just shoved everything into bags, put out the stove, and hiked back to the car. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the trees looked darker than before, even in daylight. On the drive back, we stopped at a ranger station a couple towns away to let them know what we heard. They wrote it down, asked where we were, and told us they'd check it out. One of the older rangers there, probably in his 60s, looked over while we talked. When we finished, he came closer and said something that stuck with me. He said, "Last fall, a woman was found about a mile from that cabin. Solo camper. Her throat was cut. No suspect, no motive. She bled out leaning against a tree. Never figured out who did it. That was it." He didn't say it like a warning, just a fact. We stood there in silence, unsure how to respond. Then we left. I haven't been back since. None of us have. We still talk about it sometimes, usually in pieces. Nobody really wants to go into detail. It was just one of those moments where something poked through. Something real but outside what we're used to. Not ghosts, not creatures. Just the reminder that people can be out there, watching, waiting, and sometimes they want you to come looking. We didn't, and I think that's the only reason we got to leave.